So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Harish Pillay, and happy InnerSource Day. It is Thursday for me here in Singapore. It's almost Thursday evening. And let me just click on this, share my video. All right, there you go. I'll be, going through some thoughts around AI and InnerSource. I was attending yesterday's session as well, and there was a lot of comments and ideas around what does it mean to have AI and how do you do that in an in an InnerSource manner or deploy in an InnerSource environment and so on and so forth. There are many thoughts in here, so let me just move on. This is an image. I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's a gate in the middle of nowhere. It's got, you can see somewhere on the right-hand side of the vertical, on the right-hand side, this looks like barbed wire. But this gate doesn't stop anything. It sits there. There must have been a reason for this gate to be there. So the idea behind this is known as the Chesterton fence. Now, the question here is, what is the Chesterton fence? This was a concept that was articulated by G.K. Chesterton some early part of last century. And he was recounting, this is fairly older English in some sense. I'll just read this out to you because I think it is, when you hear it, then you get to understand the concept behind here. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law. Let us say, for the sake of simplicity, there's a fence or a gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes up to it and says, I don't see the use of this. Let us clear it away. So in the picture that you see, what is the gate doing there? Why does it have to be there? Why don't you just get rid of it? Because it doesn't seem to be serving any purpose. But the next comment is, to which a more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer the question that was asked earlier. If you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then when you come back and tell me what you do see the use of it, I will allow you to destroy it. So I wanted to frame the conversation during my 15 minutes or so to be around this idea that what has been already done doesn't always have to be thrown away, or having a means for us to check and validate whether this makes sense is something that always has to be asked for. Otherwise, I hate to be in a situation where you may, I'm sure some of you have come across where somebody will say, oh, this is how we have always done. And they have no idea why that particular way of doing things is being done. Because whoever made the decision is either no longer in the organization, it has long gone, or it came from a merger or an acquisition, and nobody knows why that particular process is currently being used, even though it seems to be illogical to continue with it. So this is, I want to frame this here so that in the rest of my talk, I'll try and draw some of the lessons from here. So in the Chesterton fence, there are some insights that we can glean. Don't tear down the fence. That's one option. Yeah, don't tear it down. Maybe it's a nice tourist spot right now, right? In the middle of nowhere, you have a fence. Why don't we just leave it there and have become a heritage site? Or we can remove it and we risk unforeseen problems. Do we know what the unforeseen problems could be? We don't know. We have no idea what they could be. And by recognizing that I am not sure what this would end up becoming, I am displaying a sense of intellectual humility. In other words, I am not saying that my way is the right way to do it. I'm willing to figure out what was the thinking that went behind at that point in time when the gate was set up. There must have been a reason. Then you go and tease those reasons and figure out whether those reasons are still valid today. So it is an intellectual exercise you have to go through in order to figure out whether you want to tear down the gate. And in doing so also, sometimes you find that you didn't have to tear it down. There was another thing that was next to it that you can just go ahead and work on it and do something with it, and that would have been more than sufficient, and you have just left this gate alone. So sparking the need for progress. Sometimes all you need to is ask the question, and you are then shown a direction which you would never have thought of if not for the question that you asked. Now, so how does it help InnerSource? Now, we all know that InnerSource, the idea behind it comes from the open source world. We're all very familiar with it. We have repeatedly being mentioned in many of the other speakers as well. And what we are trying to do is to bring the ideas of open source into into an organization so that a subset of those benefits can be something that the organization gains. I'm putting here a little pitch to a talk that I gave at a 2020 InnerSource Summit for APAC. And I was my thesis then was that doing the open source InnerSource is a step towards the gold standard, which is open source. So you're welcome to watch the video after this session. Now, swinging back to the InnerSource stuff that we are all very familiar with, we have this wonderful document called the InnerSource Patterns, which I think is a phenomenal set of ideas and how things should be done in various forms. So what I wanted to figure out is, given the topic that I picked, does this InnerSource Patterns document have anything to say? So I went to the page, and a few things that concerns me all the time. The first question I asked is about tech debt. Is there any technical debt that these patterns talk about? I searched, and there were, I think, 3 different references to it. Great, 3 references, that's fine. Then I figured, why don't I ask about artificial intelligence? Does it have anything in these patterns about AI? And the answer that came back was quite interesting. It says, an answer could not be found for your question. You could try rephrasing it or be more specific. And it suggested, what is the role of artificial intelligence in InnerSource projects and so on. So you know what? I just picked the first option and I clicked on it. And he came back and said, no answer to be found for that question. So we do have a repository, a set of contents that has use and value in an area where AI as a idea currently doesn't have any correlation yet. So this is an area where we could probably look at to see whether there is something that we can add to in this corpus of information that we have called the patterns or InnerSource patterns. Now, applying AI to, just hang on a second, something is blocking my screen. All right, there you go. Applying AI to InnerSource environments. So I'm switching gear a little bit to see how is it that we can actually use or deploy or benefit from InnerSource activities using AI solutions. Now, in order to set some context, there are two very broad categories of AI. One is known as discriminative AI. This is the kind of AI that has been around since the start, since 1956. I would call it discriminatory AI, disc AI. And the other one, the generative AI, this is a new kid on the block. It's about 4 or 5 years old. The one that the big breakout was in November of 2022, 2 years ago with ChatGPT, and suddenly it hit the common the conscience of everybody to say, hey, there is an interesting way to do AI related stuff. So with these 2 categories as very large, broad categories, what does that mean from an InnerSource point of view? So from an InnerSource point of view, what this basically means is that, this is a table I put together. I culled a lot of other sources as well because, I felt I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm just going to pick and choose a lot of different thoughts there. When you look at the features that you're looking for in an AI solution, data generation, training, goal, applications, advantages, analogy, blah, 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 and you take the 2 different broad categories, you'll see that there are subtle differences between the 2. Discriminative AI is relatively smaller. In the case of data generation, for example, it classifies existing data. It does labeling. show a bunch of pictures of dogs or cats or cars and stuff like that, and it gets labeled. And then when you show a random picture of a cat or some other object, it whether tells you whether it is a cat or a dog or something else. So this is labeling. This is done to train the model. Whereas in the Gen AI space, that's a very different space, a different way of working on it. In this case, what happens here is that you have. Sorry, am I still sharing? Yeah. Okay. In this case, you have it creates. Okay, I'm not stopping. Okay. In Gen AI, it actually creates new data. It has got a corpus of information it has gleaned by training. And when you query it, it generates new data. The answers that you get, that is not the same as what it was inside, right? In the case of discriminative AI, you train it with images, audio, video, whatever, and eventually you present something in that realm. It will then tell you whether this is a cat or a dog or whatever it might be. So there is a distinction between these two types of AI systems. The discriminative AI is something that we are far more familiar with in the kinds of environments that we have deployed it. For example, facial recognition with cameras, for example, or in airports, and so on and so forth. So discriminative AI is very clear. We know how that works. In the case of generative AI, this is new area, new things. There are many more questions here, primarily because generative AI is very probabilistic, whereas discriminative AI is fairly consistent. There are certain very fixed norms that it follows, and it doesn't deviate from there. Whereas in the case of generative AI, it does. So with this context and background and some ideas behind it, so I like this particular example that I want to give. The analogy, the third last line, it says, for discriminative AI, it's like sorting laundry, shirts, pants, socks, and so on. Whereas generative AI is after I trained the generative AI for what looks like a socks and pants and so on to generate a brand new shirt from it. So that's one way to think about these two types of broad categories. Now, applying AI to InnerSource environments is all about access to data. Without the data, there is no AI. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen because it needs something. It needs to start somewhere. Now, the start somewhere is where data resides. So the provenance of data is essentially the baseline. But in any InnerSource opportunity or effort by organizations, this has to be carefully watched. Because where are you getting the training data for the kinds of AI solutions you're trying to deploy, whether it is discriminative AI or generative AI? Discriminative AI, there has been a lot of deployments of that. So that's not a big problem. People kind of understand that. Generative AI is where the issues are front and center, and it hasn't been solved yet. So access to data, first question you have to ask is this your data? Was the model that you are using trained on your data? Do you know where the data resides and where it came from? So there are many questions that needs to be asked. In the case, again, going back to discriminative AI, it is still very important questions, but you probably already know the answers to it. Whereas in generative AI, because of the very, very large corpus of training data, it's very hard to know where it comes from, what kind of provenance it has, and so on and so forth. So it's a real problem space that we are looking at. So let me then switch a little bit and have a word about data, because data is really the baseline for everything. And I would prefer to lean on the open data definition, which comes from the open, it is provided in the Open Data Handbook, in the Open Knowledge Foundation. And it says, and I read this definition to you, open data is data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone, subject only at most to the requirement to attribute and share alike. Now, there are many questions around data. Some types of data cannot be released because it has got privacy constraints. It could be medical data. It could be educational data, whatever it might be. There will be some subset of data that cannot be revealed. I have no problems with those being kept aside. But everything else, every single bit has to have a way to be published and a way for us to go and check and verify that it is indeed what it claims to be. Because based on that, then when you train your models, that you have some element of verifiability to go back and check, oh, this was where the data, this is how the interpretation happened in the generative AI model that I'm using, because the data it was trained on, this was the data that was trained on. So it is very important to keep this in mind. I would rather prefer that we go with this definition of what data is, and we work from that to solve the rest of the issues that we have around open source and AI.
Harish, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but we're running out of time and people are already lining up from the other track.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Yes.
Great.
For AI to be deployed in the inner source context, does it need to comply with open data? What about complying with OSI's AI definition, version 1.0? So this is where I think you have to say there's danger ahoy. This is a comic from Popeye. I feel that this is actually very apt. There are many issues that we need to be concerned about. So the conjecture is this: if your organization is deploying AI systems to be used within your inner source initiatives and projects, not knowing the training data provenance is a very bad idea. Don't just take it from me, take it from Bruce Schneier. And that brings us back to the Chesterton fence. So the question I have here is, should we be looking at data on its own or data as the source for everything else that comes from it? That is the question that this fence is asking me to query and ask, and hope that you have the opportunity to think about it as well. So with that, I thank you very much for your time.